Welcome back to The Mindful Hunter. I'm your host as always, Jay Nickel, and we have a very special review and raffle planned for you today. We're going to do a head-to-head review of the Stone Glacier Sky Solus against the Hilleberg Soulo. Before we dive into that, quick note from the sponsor, Mindful Reviews. This is the community gear review platform I have built from the ground up. It is a membership subscription-based review community. You get to participate in the raffles. Lifetime members get entered to win monthly prizes. You get to help me pick the gear that I review. I'm going to keep this short and sweet. If you are interested in joining a community of like-minded individuals who are deeply interested in analytical, non-sponsored reviews of highly technical gear, Mindful Reviews is the place for you. Mindful-reviews.com. We'd love to have you. Now, one more quick note. I am raffling off both these tents. Only members of Mindful Reviews can participate in the raffle. If you're interested in buying a raffle ticket, I suggest you go do it right now. These go very quickly. There will only be 100 tickets sold. As always, I have done my best to quantify as much of this review as possible, to be as objective, data, and evidence focused as possible, but there will always be an element of my own subjective opinion and experience. So take everything that you see and hear in this review with a grain of salt. I'm going to do the best I can to describe my experience with these tents and who I think they might be best suited for. But if you're a drastically different person, or if you hunt in significantly different ways, then the information might not be perfectly applicable to you. And as always, I'm open for feedback. So any questions, comments, or concerns, please drop them down in the comments section below. I would love to continue the conversation and learn even after this review is posted. One final note about these tents. These are highly specialized tents. I don't personally recommend either one of these tents for your do-it-all, average tent. Like if you're only going to buy one tent, neither of these tents is likely the tent that you should buy. These are very durable, very sturdy, heavy in comparison to other 3-season shelters, and not really applicable for year-round use. I read a review the other day that in one of the comments it made about the Solo Black Label is that except for the hottest and driest of conditions, this was going to be the tent that individual was going to use year-round. I found this a shocking comment. The Solo Black Label weighs 6.5 pounds, is quite small, and doesn't have particularly large vestibules. I cannot find a strong reason to use that tent outside of deep winter or intense storm-like conditions. And not only that, at 6.5 pounds, I think it's irresponsible for most people to take that on a backpack hunt where you could get the same durability and storm protection from a 3.5 or 4 pound tent and probably end up with more room. So I want to be very specific that these tents, in my opinion, are meant for deep winter, bad weather, really intense hunting. This is a piece of kit you want to add to your gear list after you've kind of built up the bare fundamentals. Like I would strongly recommend purchasing a very sturdy 3-season tent, something like the Hilleberg Niak or the Sea to Summit Tellus TR2. These are significantly lighter. They're still very sturdy. There's significantly more room. So please just keep that in mind. I am not recommending these for a one and done solution for your shelter needs year round. We're going to focus on deep winter hunting and how these two particular shelters fared under those conditions. Now, on that note, this review has been 2 years in the making. So I have had both these tents on multiple deep winter hunts. I've spent over 20 nights in each of them over the last 2 years. I've spent extended periods at minus 25 degrees Celsius and minus 10 degrees Fahrenheit in these tents. I've had nights where they got dumped on over 12 to 16 inches of snow in a single night. So I am extremely confident in the opinions that I've come to based on my experience in these tents. And I feel very comfortable telling you I put both these through the ringer. Now I'm gonna get to all the details and which one I think is better and why one may suit my needs more than the others, but I wanna set out right from the start and say that these are both premium tents. Both these companies have done a fantastic job. There's a couple things about each tent that aren't my favorite thing in the world, but if you own either of these tents, you should have a high level of confidence in the gear that you've purchased. These are both great tents, but as usual, on Mindful Reviews, our job here is to dig into the nitty gritty and really get into the minutia and the nuance and the detail. So that's what we're about to do. I compared these tents across 20 different categories. These were price, length, height, vestibule space, practical vestibule space, advertised floor material, fly material, body material, doors, weight honesty, tent pegs, ease of setup, build quality, pole quality, weather resistance, breathability / condensation, heat retention, and a personal X factor. Now, what I did is score each of the tents along those 20 categories. The winner of each category gets a 1 and the loser gets a 2. The tent with the lowest score at the end of the review comes in first place. The tent with the higher score comes in second place. But even after I share the scores, I'm going to give you my qualitative interpretation of those scores and let you know what type of hunter and what style of hunting I think each of these tents is best suited to. If you would like access to this spreadsheet after the review, all members of Mindful Reviews get full access to all spreadsheets. As soon as I post this review, it gets posted to the Mindful Reviews community platform and the spreadsheet is attached to the video. So if you're a data nerd like I am and you want to dig into this and see how I derived the scores that I did, anybody over at Mindful Reviews gets full access to the spreadsheets at all times, and I'm more than happy to answer any additional questions. Now, before we get into the 20 categories, I think what might be best is I also, a couple days ago, went and set these tents up side by side. I really find when doing tent reviews, this is invaluable. You need to see me get in the tents, move around in the tents, open and close the doors, have them set up so you can really get a sense of the context and the shape and the size and the structure so that when I'm talking about the things that I like and the things that I don't like, you actually have a mental image that you can rely on and you have something that you can relate it to. So I'm going to skip over that footage now. These are the kind of highlights from that half day of filming that I did. And then when we come back, I'll dive into each of the categories. All right, so I'm going to go over the majority of the details of these two tents back in studio. I wanted to bring them outside and set them up for a couple main reasons. Number one, seeing tents side by side really helps you get an idea of scale, structure, pole design, all that kind of stuff. And also, we can open them up and kind of climb inside. I've brought a sleeping pad so we can get an idea of how much room is inside each tent. And then also, while I've camped extensively in winter conditions with both these tents, I've never set them up back to back. So right out of the gate, what I'd like to do is just kind of go over some of the things that I noticed as I was setting these tents up. And while they both have a lot of similarities, being freestanding, essentially one-man tents, I do think there's some important differences to call out. So let's take a look at the Stone Glacier first. You're gonna notice that the outside fly does not come all the way down to the bottom, whereas the fly on the Solo does come all the way down to the bottom. Now that's one of the defining differences in the Hilleberg line of tents. Now they use colors, not seasons, but for our purposes, as you graduate from the 3 season to the 4 season in the Hilleberg line, you tend to get less ventilation. And the reason for that is to protect your temperature and keep you warm inside the tent. So right out of the gate, the Solo is gonna have a little bit better temperature management, or it's gonna keep you a little bit warmer than the Solus will. However, the Solus is gonna have better ventilation, so you could have less condensation. Now, the next thing I'd like to point out is the guy lines. The guy lines on the Hilleberg are definitely beefier than the guy lines on the Solus. The other thing that you're gonna notice right away, which I've probably also already mentioned in this video, is that you enter the Stone Glacier Solus through the kind of front narrow section. So you essentially have no vestibule over top of your door. Whereas the Hilleberg Soulo is a much more conventional tent in that you enter it from the side. So you do have a vestibule. Now I'm gonna dig into what I like and don't like about that feature a little bit more when we dive inside the tent. Now, as far as setting these tents up, they are almost identical. They're kind of finicky in their own way. They take, I would say, 5 minutes to set up. Now, one tip I'd like to give everybody, if you are deep winter camping and you are in a lot of snow, what you want to do is, while wearing your snowshoes, pack down your pad as early in the day as possible. The pressure is going to set up that snow, and you're going to be able to stick tent pegs right in the snow if you can give it an hour or two to set up. If you're trying to set up tents in fresh snow, you're going to have a lot of problems getting your tent pegs to stick. You might be better off trying to tie some things or bury some sticks, or you can always take the tent pegs, put them sideways, and try and pack a lot of snow. But I have found, even if you only have 20 or 30 minutes, really packing down that pad first. And if I'm getting there at night and everything's already, I'm not gonna have a couple hours to leave it, I will actually pack the pad out, set the tent up, put no poles in, and then kind of go about my evening routine. I'll make my dinner, I'll make my bed, I'll get everything ready. I might even listen to an audiobook. And then before I go to bed, that will have then given the snow enough time to set up, and the tent pegs will stick in phenomenally well. Now, as I was saying, they're each a little bit finicky to get set up. Now, you can take the different layers of the Stone Glacier apart and kind of reattach it every time you set the tent up. I do not recommend that. Once you have like the little sandwich built, it's kind of got this web truss design that the poles go through. Once that's fully attached, I leave it attached. However, when you're sliding the poles through, all the little nylon webbing loops where the web truss is connected to the main body of the tent, your poles get stuck every time. So you end up like sliding it through 8 inches, reaching forward, fiddling with a loop, sliding it through 8 inches, reaching forward, fiddling with a loop. It's not the end of the world, but it's mildly annoying. But you only have 2 identical poles, so there's like very little to screw up when you're setting up the Stone Glacier. So once you've got those in and you've popped them in both sides, you can literally get away with no pegs. I have slept in this with 0 pegs, had decent wind that night, no problem. It's a very strong freestanding structure. Now, the thing that's a little bit finicky about the Hilleberg is that there's no actual sleeves that the poles go through. So you essentially, there's, maybe 12 to 18 inches of sleeve at the bottom of all 4 corners. You slide your poles in there, and then you got to clip these loops on, which it's not the end of the world, but I mean, it's a bit of a pain because you're like clipping all these loops on. So that's why I said they kind of each have their own quirks as far as setup goes, and I wouldn't say one is any more annoying than the other. And like I say, like 5-10 minutes tops, both these tents are set up, like they're super easy. Now, the thing about the Hilleberg is there is a 3rd pole of a different size. That's another thing that differentiates the Hilleberg lines of tents. When you start introducing different size poles, they consider that adding a level of complexity, and that's kind of what moves you up the color ranking system. And so this does have 3 poles, and that 3rd pole kind of needs to go across the center. And that's what spreads the tent out. And again, so just like with the Stone Glacier, you could put the 3 poles in, get inside, go to bed. I've done it before. I'm sure I'll do it again. Get to camp real late at night. Don't want to bother with any of your tent pegs. Again, had some decent wind. It's a fully freestanding structure, and it's one of the things that I like about these tents. I do prefer a freestanding tent, especially for deep winter conditions. I feel a little bit more secure in there. If there are crazy winds or crazy storms during the night, I'm not worried that the entire structural integrity of my shelter relies upon some guy line staying in snow that may or may not stay packed throughout the night. Okay, one last thing that I'll note is that there is a single vestibule at the front door, like I mentioned previously, on the Hilleberg. And on the Stone Glacier, there are 2 vestibules that you access from the inside. Now, there is no exterior access to the vestibules from the Stone Glacier. You have to go inside the tent, through these little cubbies, and then you can get into the vestibule. And I'm gonna get into more of my thoughts on that particular design and what I like and don't like about it later on. But for now, that's kind of the first things that really jumped out to me once I had these set up side by side and some of the things I remembered from setting them up in the winter. So now what we're gonna do is I'm gonna blow up a large sleeping pad, a large rectangular sleeping pad, because that's what I tend to use. And I'm gonna put that inside both of the tents, and I'll crawl in and I'll make some more additional notes about the tents themselves. And we can get a good idea of the actual size in the interior and the vestibule size of each of the particular tents. Okay, so for sense of scale, I'm 6'1", currently 230 pounds, and this is a Q-Core SLX long wide. So it's 25 inches wide and 78 inches long. So first off, let's see how much room there is for me. So if I lay down right in the middle, my toes are kind of just touching the door and the tip of my head is just touching the back. So at 6'1", I am touching on both the front and back of the tent. Now, in my early discussions with Kurt, he did say he slept on an angle, and he's taller than me, I believe, which I think might work with a mummy pad, because you would have rounded tops and bottoms. I tried to do it with this one, and because of the rectangular shape, it wouldn't fit in on an angle. So while it's a little tight, front to back, side to side, I say I've got a good solid, 6 to 8 inches room on both sides. And what I would tend to do is put like a dry bag on each side, or my camera bag over here and a dry bag over here, and that would keep my sleeping pad centered in the tent. And then I had lots of room for, like, I could leave stuff out at night, I could reach over, I could grab stuff, I could have a bottle of water in here. Like, this is definitely the roomier of the two tents. Now, in the middle, I have a solid 3 inches of headroom. I can move around, I can take a shirt on, I can take a shirt off without brushing the sides of the tent. It is definitely fairly roomy inside. Now, let's address the lack of the vestibule in the front and the fact that it is a front instead of a side entrance tent. Now, the first couple nights, it really annoyed me because every time I would open this door, snow would fall inside my tent. I finally figured out if I kind of smacked the tent first and kind of got it all the schluff off, that would stop happening. And the surprisingly nice part was I tend to get up and take a leak at least 2 or 3 times a night. Being a bigger guy, it's half because I gotta take a leak, but it's also half because my back just gets sore sleeping on sleeping pads. And I find getting up for, a minute or two really kind of stretches out my back. And then when I lay back down, I fall right back asleep and I get another, 1 to 3 hours of uninterrupted sleep. And I kind of go through that cycle 2 to 4 times per night. And I found once I got used to this tent, I could have my quilt done up, do everything normal, and what I would do is I would just slide my quilt down, kind of pull my knees out of it, and I would rock up, and I could come right up onto my knees, and I could literally just take a leak out the front of the tent. Now, here's the other thing that I ended up doing with this one once I got to my final camping location on a couple of my different hunts, and I knew I was gonna be there for an extended period of time. I brought a 7-foot by 9-foot Z-Pax Dyneema tarp, and I ran it out over the front, kind of rectangular lengthwise. And that was my favorite winter camping setup I've ever had. I had the convenience of the front entrance, being able to take a leak in the middle of the night, and I had this huge vestibule. I never had to worry about snow. I could leave my pack out overnight. I never had to worry about anything. And that tarp only weighs an additional 5 ounces. So the combo of the Stone Glacier with the Z-Pax is still lighter than just the Hilleberg Soulo all by itself. So that was really where this tent shone for me. Now, you do have to be a little bit picky about selection. I would always set up in the timber because it was really easy to set up that tarp if I had a bunch of different trees to tie off to. And I would normally kind of keep that in mind when I was picking my camping site selection, because I would kind of look for a nice grouping of trees that would enable me to hang that tarp fairly easily. Now, the one thing I don't like about this tent is the vestibule access. So let's dive into that now. All right, so I'm hoping you can see this pretty good. You see this kind of porthole shape thing? So essentially, there's a drawstring in the middle connected to a little loophole back here. You pull this out, you open this drawstring, you can then open this, and you have access through this to your vestibule. I don't want to come off as insulting or derogatory, but this is one of the most useless features I've personally ever seen in a tent. I haven't found anyone who actually likes this design. I asked 3 people who've ran this tent, and no one ended up using these on a regular basis. For starters, in the winter, your tent tends to be soaked in condensation. So every time you try and get in and out of this thing, you end up soaking your clothes. Also, if you can see through here, there's only about 8 inches of room between this like porthole and the thing. So I don't even know what you would have room for on the other side. I guess you could put your boots there, but I'm gonna be honest, in a severely cold winter hunt, you want your boots inside the tent. It's the only thing that's gonna keep them from freezing. If you stick them out there, they're gonna freeze. There's no way you're getting a pack through here. So, I mean, you could stuff like a dry bag full of food, but then if it's in a dry bag, why does it need to be out there? This just makes no sense to me. I have no idea why these are here. If this was up to me, I would delete this entire mechanism and I would place 2 zippers on the outside vestibules. That would allow you to access the vestibules from the outside, because then you could zip them open, slide your pack in, zip it closed. I have a Sea to Summit tent that allows you to do that. It's incredibly practical, incredibly useful. I use it all the time. And if you were gonna have inside access, I don't understand why you just don't have a zipper that runs up here, like a lightweight, non-waterproof zipper. Instead of having all this additional fabric, these cords, these toggles, this extra seam here, like it just doesn't make any sense to me. So is it a deal breaker for the tent? Absolutely not. But I think it's a real missed opportunity, because you essentially have these twin vestibules that become basically useless, because in the winter, there's really no way to get stuff out. You can kind of slide it underneath, and if you remove the tent peg, you can kind of lift up a flap and squeeze some stuff under, but it kind of messes with the structure of the tent, you know, every time you do it. So this is my one real big beef with this tent. It used to be the front door, then I got used to the front door, ended up falling in love with the front door, but these side portholes just make 0 sense to me. If you love them and you use them, please drop a comment below, because I'm open-minded. I'm willing to admit I may be wrong, and maybe there's, you know, a better use case for these things. But of the dudes I know who have run this tent and myself, we haven't really figured it out yet. So that's about it from inside the Solus. Let's move over to the Hilleberg Soulo. Okay, now we're over in the Hilleberg Soulo. So right out of the gate, it is a much smaller tent on the inside. Even when I sit up, if I sit up completely straight, my head is in full contact with the roof. And if I just slouch a little bit, I have 1 to 2 inches. But my shoulders are constantly touching the sides. So putting on and taking off shirts, you are going to get kind of damp condensation on your shoulders and your back trying to get changed in this tent. Just like last time, the 78-inch pad essentially goes right from head to foot. So when I lay down, I can feel the tip of my toes on the bottom of the tent and the tip of my head on the top of the tent. So lengthwise, it's the same. On the front here, I have 0 room inside the tent, and there's a bit of a triangle of space in the rear. The widest part is about 8 inches, and then it tapers down to 0 inches at the foot and the head. But definitely have some room here for like a book, a headlamp, a Nalgene full of water. One of the really nice things about the Solo is this dual door system. So you can open it up completely wide, have full access to the inner vestibule. And this door has both a mesh component and a fabric component. So you can either have the full fabric closed, or you can leave the fabric open and have just the mesh closed to increase the breathability and help ventilate some of the condensation. Now, the vestibule is a legitimate vestibule. You're not putting a pack or anything in here, but I have definitely set up my cook gear and made my coffee here in the morning. Now, you don't have any shelter here, so snow is gonna come in the tent, but you can close this outer door. You can make your coffee in the morning. You could have a dry bag full of clothes. So even though it only has the one vestibule as compared to the twin vestibules in the Stone Glacier, this is a much more practical vestibule. And a small tip, if you were a smaller dude or lady, you can disconnect that corner of the tent and you can actually pull this back and get a bigger vestibule here. That's never worked for me because I need a big enough pad that it basically fills the whole thing. So kind of recapping there, the vestibule is superior, the space is somewhat smaller, the doors are more configurable. You don't just have the one kind of open and closed. There is two doors on the other one and you can open just the mesh part, but remember, there's no external cover like this, so you're gonna be letting air directly into the tent, where this kind of gives you the ability to moderate temperature between the inner and vestibule portions of the tent before you actually get to the full-blown exterior. So that's essentially these two tents set up side by side. Now back in the studio, we're gonna go back over the more technical details and kind of my experience using both these tents, which one I prefer for myself and which one I think might be better for you, depending on body shape and size, hunting style, terrain, and where you spend most of your time hunting. So there's the footage out in the field. Now, I kind of jumped the gun a little bit and got into some of my takeaways and insights before delving into the exact categories that they were referenced to. But, you know, when you're out there and you're sitting in the tent and things come to your mind, you don't want to forget them or leave them out. So I will dive into each of those insights in more detail as we get to the appropriate category. So without further ado, let's dig into each of these categories. First up, we've got price. This one's pretty simple. The Stone Glacier Solus retails for $545 USD and the Hilleberg Soulo retails for $825 USD. So the Hilleberg Soulo is significantly more expensive. So if price is your ultimate determining factor, the Solus is gonna come out on top here for sure. Now, all the numbers that I'm about to share are the advertised numbers. And I don't know if it's because of how companies measure things, or if it's, you know, done before final design, or if it's based on a paper design or a CAD design, and then once the tent is built, it shifts a little bit. But this is one of the reasons I like to climb in the tents, because I do find there's significant variance between the advertised specs and what the real world practical specs are once the tent is actually set up. So the advertised length of the Solus was 80 inches, and the advertised length of the Solo was 86 inches. Now, something does not jive with these measurements, because when I lay down in both tents, my feet brush the foot of the tent and my head brushes the head of the tent. So if I am taking up equal room in each tent and touching the walls at both times, I don't understand how there's a claimed 6-inch discrepancy. Either the Solus is longer than advertised or the Solo is shorter. Now, what I should have done is taken a measuring tape with me and actually measured it out in the field. I forgot to do that. Just know I'm 6'1" and I just lightly brush the end of both of these tents. Now, height, there is a substantial difference, as you noticed from the in the field footage. Advertised for the Solus is 42 inches. Advertised for the Solo is 37 inches. Essentially, when you're in the Solo If you're a big, broad guy like myself, you are touching all the walls simultaneously. You're going to be brushing your shoulders, and the top of your head is going to be brushing the inside of the tent. Now, that's not the end of the world, but when it starts getting full of condensation, it can be a little annoying. Now, the Solus, with a 42-inch internal height, has much more room. I could get up in the morning, I could put on a shirt, I could sit there and sip a cup of coffee. My head wasn't touching the roof, my shoulders weren't touching the walls. It was a much more comfortable internal experience. And then finally, the vestibule measurements are quite interesting on this. So if we go off of the specs, the Solus is 25 inches by 80 inches, and there's two of them. And when I say 25 inches wide by 80 inches long, I don't mean that it's 25 inches the whole way. The longest part is 25 inches, and then it tapers down to 0 inches. And the Solo is measured the same way, but 21 inches at the apex and 86 inches long. So on paper, the Solus has considerably more vestibule space, but this is not how it plays out in reality. The sides of the Solus come down quite sharply, and then they have like this built-in kneed flange that I would assume is to like help deflect wind and weather and whatnot. And what they have done is they have measured from the outer edge of that flange to the outer edge of the tent. And yes, you get 25 inches when you do that, but because of the knee in the fabric, which is only 4 to 5 inches off the ground, your actual usable space is much closer to 8 to 10 inches. So as I noted on that in the field footage, the vestibules in the Solus are significantly smaller than the single vestibule in the Solo. You can legitimately cook a cup of coffee. You can sit there and get your stuff ready in the morning. You can close the outer door and still have room to do stuff in there without weather coming in. The Solus vestibules are not very practical or usable in my opinion. Now you can put stuff in there, and I know I already commented on this earlier. I don't like the porthole drawstring in the Solus. I think they should have if they're going to keep them the shape that they are and not give you full-blown zipper access from the internal, I would rather a single zipper on the outside, so I could go outside the tent, open the vestibule, slide my pack in, access the vestibule space, and then close it back up. As it stands now, there's no external access to the vestibule unless you have very small stuff that you can kind of slide underneath. And you're really only going to fit small things through that kind of porthole drawstring, attachment on the inside. So at the end of the day, that's really the big failing of the Solus, in my opinion, is not just the vestibule design, but the vestibule access and the way they've designed access to those vestibules. So while on paper, the Solus comes out on top for vestibule space, when we get to the practical vestibule space, the Solo is far superior and exceeds that of the Solus. But when we talk about actual practical space inside the tent, the Solus comes out on top clearly. And see, this is why I think it's important to take the data that the company shares, but then cross-reference it with your own lived experience with the actual gear. Because on paper, the Solo appears much larger than it really is. And it's not until you get inside there. I think there's also much more drape to the interior chamber of the Solo than there is to the Solus. And I think that kind of accounts for that feeling of like shrunken space, or that the walls are kind of closing in on you a little bit. Having spent a week straight in that Solus on my first deep winter mountain goat hunt, it gets a little claustrophobic in there sometimes. Like if you're stuck in there for a full day with weather and like all you're doing is like reading books and drinking coffee, like you start going a little bit stir crazy. I think with the additional ventilation that the Solus has and just the bigger room inside, you don't get that same sense of claustrophobia, and you feel, you can spend time much more comfortably inside the Solus as compared to the Solo. Okay, so let's get into what these tents are actually made of. So the floor material on the Stone Glacier is made of 20D ripstop nylon that's PE coated. Now, PE stands for polyethylene. You're gonna see tents do PE coating and PU coating. That's polyethylene coated or polyurethane coated. These are essentially extra layers of liquid material that are added to the laminates after the fact in order to increase their water resistance. And I'll be honest, the building materials and the fabric choices are where the Hilleberg really starts to pull ahead of the Stone Glacier in its durability and how robust it is. And the floor material in the Hilleberg is made out of a 70D equivalent ripstop nylon. So a 70D would be more than triple the kind of strength of a 20D. So it's pretty clear that the Hilleberg starts pulling out with a much stronger floor material. And we get to the fly material, this is the same thing. So with the Solus, we have a 15D PU coated material. And this is where the Solo uses the Curlon 1200, which is just a proprietary name for basically a 30D ripstop nylon material, but it's been triple silicone coated. So again, kind of twice the durability. You got a 15D compared to a 30D material. We're also going to see some discrepancies in weight later on, and a large factor of this discrepancy, I believe, comes from the density and the quality of the materials used. And then finally, we get to the body of the tent itself, and we have a 15D nylon for the Solus, and we have a 30D DWR coated nylon for the Solo. So far more strong and durable materials for the Hilleberg Soulo. And I will say, this is kind of the hallmark of Hilleberg. They tend to overbuild everything. It's what they're known for, but it gives you an insane amount of confidence in their gear. Like if you were going to war, a Hilleberg is what you want to take because it will never let you down. Let's talk about the doors. I alluded to this a little bit in the video, but for me, the Solo has a much more kind of practical door configuration that gives you more versatility. By having the two doors and by having the one door having a fully mesh component, you really have the ability to modulate temperature much more efficiently than you do with the Stone Glacier. Helps with moisture management. You can actually sit into the vestibule space and cook. You can't do that in the Solo. So I think of the two tents, the Hilleberg has the superior door design. Now that's a little bit tongue-in-cheek because based on the fact that the Solus is a front-on entrance, you simply don't have the option to have a similar door structure to the Solo. So it's one of the trade-offs going with the front entrance versus side entrance tent design. Okay, let's get into the weight. So the advertised weights for these tents with everything in, that's the bags, the cords, the tent pegs, the poles, main body, fly, all of it. Solus comes in at 4 pounds, 6 ounces. The Solo comes in at 5 pounds, 5 ounces. So almost exactly 1 pound heavier for the Hilleberg. Now, that's not the whole story. This has become kind of one of the things that I'm known for, which is like weight honesty. And I believe in weighing everything as soon as it shows up. So I weighed both these tents in the bag. So I've camped in both these several times. They've been treated the same. There's been nothing taken out. They still have all the pegs they came with. This was in the bag that it came from the company in. There was nothing done. So they should weigh exactly what they were supposed to weigh. Now, the Solus comes in at 4 pounds and 6.4 ounces. So that's only a discrepancy of 0.4 ounce. I'm willing to write that off as potential scale error. That's nothing. Now, the Hilleberg comes in at 5 pounds, 8 ounces. So that's a 3 ounce discrepancy, which doesn't sound like a whole lot, but 3 ounces is almost 4 ounces, and 4 ounces is a quarter of a pound. And when we are getting ready for really intense backcountry hunts, a quarter of a pound is a big deal. Lots of times when you're comparing different pieces of gear, you literally might be buying something because it's 1 to 2 ounces lighter than something else. So I think it's important to share that Hilleberg has underestimated their weight by 3 ounces. Now, can this be due to fabric inequalities and more cords and guy lines on one tent as compared to another tent? Like, do I think this is intentionally misleading, or is this just a potential byproduct of mass manufacturing? I think it's the latter. I don't believe that Hilleberg is being intentionally misleading in any way. However, I would like companies to stop being so optimistic, because in my experience, what they're doing when they weigh things is taking like the best case scenario or the lightest one that they've got. Because I have never yet, after weighing backpacks, sleeping pads, tents, water bottles, headlamps, I mean everything under the sun, I have never had a piece of gear actually weigh less on the scale than it said on the website. But 95% of the time, some of it weighs a little to a lot more. So clearly, when they're estimating these weights for the websites, they're using the most favorable numbers that they possibly could. And what I would like to see is them build in a little bit of a fudge factor. Like if you're getting weights between 5 pounds 5 ounces and 5 pounds 9 ounces, let's go 5 pounds 7 ounces instead of 5 pounds 5. Or if there's a discrepancy because of, changes in fabric and little bits of pieces more in this, then give me a little bit of a range. Say this product could weigh between 5 pounds 5 ounces and 5 pounds 9 ounces, depending on the following factors. I would just like to see a little bit more clarity and a little bit more transparency in this regard, because it literally comes up every single review that products weigh more than the advertised weights. So it's a problem of the system, not a problem of the individuals receiving the gear. All right, let's move on to tent pegs. This is easy. They're both built by DAC and they are literally identical. The one peg has a small divot in the side that the others don't, but they weigh the same, they're the same structure, they're the same metal. So this one balances itself out. Now, ease of setup. I got into this a little bit in the field footage. These are essentially identically difficult in that they're not very difficult. The web truss on the Stone Glacier is a little bit annoying because the nylon tab loops constantly be getting stuck when you're trying to slide the pole through, and you kind of have to manually, maneuver each one through. And then with the Solus, you got to kind of tack on all these clips, which takes an extra 2 or 3 minutes. And then before you get that third pole through, the structure of the Solo is quite flimsy. However, that being said, I can set up both these tents in sub 5 minutes under extremely windy conditions and take them down that way as well. And I find them very easy, very intuitive. So while I comment on the little, quirks of setup, these are super easy tents to set up overall. Moving on to build quality, I'm gonna have to go with Hilleberg. I just think the quality of craftsmanship and the quality of the materials, like I said before, this is the hallmark of Hilleberg tents. They overbuild and overdesign anything. And when you're looking for that absolute tank of a shelter that will never let you down, you will never be disappointed in a Hilleberg. Now, pole quality is very interesting here because the Hilleberg uses a 9mm DAC Featherlight NSL pole, while the Stone Glacier uses a 10.6mm DAC PL pole. Now, I couldn't find a bunch of information on the newer PL poles. Given that it's a 1.65mm discrepancy and the Stone Glacier uses the bigger poles, and the PL is supposed to have a greater stiffness ranking than the NSL poles, I was expecting the Stone Glacier poles to be more sturdy. However, and I'm going to show a little screenshot here, I do have a slight bend to one of the poles of the Stone Glacier. Now, I don't have a single tent in my arsenal that at some point during the life of the tent, you don't start kind of breaking in the poles and they get a little bend to them. This is not a big deal. This is something I consider normal wear and tear. But my Hilleberg poles, which are thinner, which you think would be not as strong, have not done this yet. And they've been put through the exact same testing. So whether I had a pole that's, not 100% with the other poles in the Stone Glacier, I don't know. Whether this is a function of the DAC PL poles, I don't know. Here's what I do know. Both these poles are made by DAC. DAC probably makes 90% of the tent poles in the shelter building industry. They make everybody's poles. And both the PL and the Featherlight line are premium products within the DAC catalog. So very high grade poles. I think in reality, I might give the edge to Hilleberg here, even though on paper the Stone Glacier should be a little bit better. In my own personal experience, the Hilleberg poles seem to be holding up just a touch better. Now for weather resistance, again, I'm gonna have to give the edge to Hilleberg. I think the quality of the fabrics that they have used and the pole design itself, I just think the Hilleberg is a touch stronger and a touch more weather resistant. Now that being said, I've had zero leakage in either of these tents. However, most of it has been winter camping, so you don't get a whole lot of rain, obviously, because it's coming down as snow. So I can't really comment on the rain protection, but given the quality of the materials that they're using and the dual layer design, I don't think you're gonna see any leakage with either of these tents. But if I had to give one the edge in weather resistance, I'm gonna give it to the Hilleberg. Now, for breathability and condensation, kind of management, I'm gonna give the edge to Stone Glacier. So there's a couple main factors here. As you noticed in the field footage, the Stone Glacier fly doesn't come all the way down to the ground. Now this is a very intentional design choice that allows air to move under the tent and through the main body of the tent. There was a couple nights where I had like a decent wind blowing and I was kind of up on this one rise and I had zero condensation in the Stone Glacier. Now most nights I had condensation because I didn't have that beneficial wind, but when there was a slight breeze, the condensation in the Stone Glacier went way down. There are also multiple internal vents in the Stone Glacier. So as far as condensation management, both on paper and in my experience, the Stone Glacier takes the edge here. Now, the inverse of that is heat retention, because the better air moves through a tent, the lower condensation you're gonna have, but also the decreased ability you're gonna have to retain heat. And that's one of the most important things about a 4-season tent. A lot of 3-season tents structurally could survive through the 4th season. However, they are not built in a way to retain heat. There's too much mesh, the flies don't go all the way to the ground, there's too many vents. So when you're in something like the Solo, it is wild how warm it stays inside that tent when it's -20, -25 outside. Like when I wake up in most mornings, I'm quite comfortable inside the tent. It's not until I open the doors and get outside that I actually realize how cold it is. So while Stone Glacier evacuates moisture a little bit better, handles condensation a little bit better, Hilleberg retains heat a little bit better. Now finally, let's get into the personal X factor. So this is kind of like, all the numbers aside, all the paper, all the advertising, all that kind of stuff. Based on my experience, what are the things that stand out to me that I really like or really don't like about the tents that didn't really fit into any of those other categories? So right out of the gate, the front door of the Solus stood out to me. As I mentioned previously, I hated it at first. Every time I opened the door, I was getting a little bit of snow in the tent. You open it, wind comes coming in. But then once I got used to it, realized I had to hit the tent to get rid of all the snow, and then also set up that additional Dyneema tarp that I had. That was the game changer with the Solus. That really shifted the entire experience and only added an additional 5 ounces. Also, the ability to take a leak at night. I get up 2 or 3 times a night, every single night, to take a leak. And the ability that I could just kick my legs out of my quilt, sit right up, roll up onto my knees, stick my head at the tent, take a leak out the front door, and then literally just reverse the process to get back into the bed has to be the most convenient thing I've ever experienced in a 4-season tent. You physically cannot do that in the Solo. For starters, because of the vestibule, you can't actually get to a spot on your knees where you can stick your head out of the tent. And by the time I get high enough up on my knees in order to take a leak, I'm kind of crunched over like this. And also, you end up taking a leak right into your vestibule, okay? And you don't want to wake up in the morning and it's all sitting right there, kind of borderline inside your tent. Now, everybody's gonna say, why don't you just piss in an Nalgene bottle or an empty bottle? It kind of grosses me out. I don't like the idea of pissing in an Nalgene bottle and then cleaning it out and then drinking in it later. And I'm not gonna carry a whole extra bottle all the way back there. Also, as I mentioned before, I like getting up at night. I like that 30 seconds of getting off my back, getting up onto my knees, having a bit of a stretch, and kind of evacuating outside of the tent. So while that might not even be a factor somebody else would consider, it really swayed my experience. Like just having that ability really made the Solus a much more comfortable sleeping experience. In addition, the internal room of the Solus was a game changer. As I mentioned, the Solo feels kind of claustrophobic for a guy my size, 6'1", 230. And being inside the Solus, I was comfortable. I could move around. I had room to lay stuff out. Like, it was awesome. I could sit straight up. My head wasn't bumping. I could take my shirt off in the middle of the night if I got too hot, and I wouldn't brush up against the walls. That really stood out to me and kind of swayed me personally over to the Stone Glacier. Now, if we're going to go back and look at the Solo, two things really stand out to me from Hilleberg. One is the vestibule. I've camped in that thing in the winter, and it's awesome. Being able to make your coffee and cook, and even when it's not snowing, being able to open that vestibule a little bit and have the air coming through and being able to see outside and like relax in your tent, like it really gives you a great experience, which you don't get with the Solus by having the door all the way at your foot. You can roll aside, reach outside, grab some stuff. You can grab snow to melt. I mean, it really is way more practical of a vestibule in the Solo than the Solus. And finally, the sheer strength and durability and quality of craftsmanship on the Hilleberg cannot be stressed enough. I'm telling you, if you were going up Everest or something, like if you were going into the worst winter conditions imaginable, I would sacrifice the headroom and I would sacrifice the ability to take a leak in the middle of the night, and I would take the Hilleberg because it just is a stronger, more well-built tent. Now, it is a game of millimeters. Like the Stone Glacier is still an incredibly strong tent. It's definitely four-season worthy. If it tells you anything, the Stone Glacier is my choice. It is what I will be taking on my solo winter hunts from now on because of the things that I mentioned previously. And I'm not going on Everest. Like normally I can camp in timber. I've been through really intense winter storms. It stood up perfectly fine. And I think you're talking about like the 1% of the 1% that needs to worry about like catastrophic weather conditions. If you're looking at like average northern BC winters where you can have 40, 50, 60 kilometer an hour winds, you can have 16, 18 inches of snow dump on you a night. You can have temperatures in the minus 30 to 40 Celsius, minus 15 to 20 Fahrenheit. That Solus is going to withstand all of that and then some. So I have, no concerns about the Solus being able to push through what I need to push it through for my own circumstances. Now, before we get into my own personal choice of which tent I am going to use from now on and the final scores, I had a bit of a Q&A and I want on Instagram and I want to answer people's questions. So let's just fly through these real quick. These models need to be seam sealed. As far as I understand, neither of these tents need to be seam sealed. I didn't seam seal either one of them and they worked perfectly fine. Another guy asks, why would you look at buying a hunting brand tent versus a mountaineering tent? Well, funnily enough, neither of these are hunting brand tents. Hilleberg was making tents long before anybody was buying them for hunting, and Slingfin makes the tents for Stone Glacier. And Slingfin is a shelter company, not a hunting company. It's very rare that hunting companies make their own tents. Kuiu might be the only one I can think of off the top of my head. First Light uses Nemo, Stone Glacier uses Slingfin. I can think of another couple of examples, but there are not very many purebred hunting companies that actually make their own shelters. So, and even if they do, they're going to be heavily influenced by the design from mountaineering. So in my experience, yeah, you're probably better off buying mountaineering tents, which is why these two tents got reviewed. They're both from mountaineering companies. Worst case scenario, which one has the better setup design? As I mentioned before, I would give a slight edge to the Hilleberg in that. Which one's been better at dealing with condensation? Stone Glacier takes the lead. How much space do they take in your pack when fully packed down? This is a great question. The Stone Glacier is significantly smaller. I'll insert some footage here of them packed up side by side. I think Hilleberg does themselves a bit of an injustice by making it, they give you a huge bag. And it's nice because you don't have to like cram it in there, and it's not difficult to put the tent back in the bag like some tent bags are, but it also doesn't help you condense the material to take up less space in your pack. So the Stone Glacier is significantly smaller once packed up. If hunting solo, when would you take a one-person tent versus a two-person tent? It depends on the season. When I'm in winter and weight is at a premium and the tents are already significantly heavier because they weigh more because they're stronger, I take one-person shelters. When I'm in the summer or the fall and I can get away with like a Sea Summit Tellus or a NEAC, I take two-person shelters. Now that being said, none of the two-person shelters I have ever used would actually fit two people. You know, it's like a 1.5 person shelter. It's like a lot of room for one dude. Do they have stovepipe hole access? No, neither of these do. Do the Sky Solus side vestibules accommodate a backpack? No, they don't. And this is one of the reasons why I'd like external access, because if you could unzip it, I feel like you would be able to fit a pack. But currently, definitely not. And does the Stone Glacier, does the lack of a front vestibule invite water in every time you enter, exit in rain? Yes, it does. And it is slightly sloped. So no matter what you do, when you open that door, there is like a sliver of space that you 100%, even if the rain is coming straight down, some of that rain is coming into your tent. Now I did find in my experience, this is one of those things that's on the surface annoying, but doesn't really present any practical difficulties. Like getting 15 seconds of rain in your tent, it kind of dries up anyways. It's not that big a deal. But if it's one of those things that's going to drive you absolutely crazy, the Stone Glacier is probably not for you. All right, so let's take a look at the final scores. So I'm going to be completely honest. I did not rig these. I didn't even add up these scores until it was completely done. You can download the spreadsheet, look at it yourself. It came out a draw, literally 29 to 29. And I think that really tells the tale of these two tents. I do not believe that one of these tents is better than the other. I do believe that one of these tents is better for you and the situation and circumstances that you hunt in, but that's something you're gonna have to answer for yourself. So what's important to me and what will I be using moving forward? Ultimately, I like more room and I like less weight. And I'm willing to take a hair less kind of durability and weather protection that the Solus has compared to the Solo in exchange for the additional room, especially the headroom and the front door access, especially when you compare it with an ultralight tarp. I really feel like I found my perfect winter system this year. It did everything that I wanted it to do. It was light, it was sturdy, it held up in storms, it was warm inside, it had good condensation management, as good as you can have. Now, all that being said, if you were shorter, I'm 6'1", if you were 5'8", if you were leaner, sub 200 pounds, all of a sudden, the difference in space kind of doesn't seem to be such a big factor. If you are a little bit more on the risk averse side, if you'd prefer some additional durability, decades of being known for building bomb-proof tents, you can't go wrong with the Hilleberg Soulo. I mean, I've spent over 20 nights in it in deep winter conditions. It has never once let me down. It's a beautiful tent. So again, I think given the information at your disposal, everyone is going to need to answer those questions for themselves. All I was trying to do is provide as unbiased a review as possible, highlighting the things that stood out the most to me. Okay, that's it. She's done. That's all she wrote. Remember, Raffle is live. Until the moment the raffle tickets are sold, I will update the description of this video below and let you know that the raffle tickets are gone. But until you see that, notice raffle is live. Mindful-reviews.com. There's only 100 tickets being sold. Very high odds of winning one of these tents. Also, please come and join at Mindful Reviews. If you like what I do, if you like these unbiased, non-sponsored reviews where all we worry about is the technical proficiency of the products themselves and not the companies that are responsible for making them, the best way to support what I do and make sure that you see more of it is to go join up at Mindful Reviews. Mindful-reviews.com. As always, if you could like, share, comment, subscribe, I would greatly appreciate your help in getting this video out to as many people that it might be useful for as possible. And until next time, thanks for tuning in.